It had not even been a year since the suppression of the rebellion on the world of Calystricius was nearing its end. The local insurgents resisted desperately, but their lack of training and equipment eventually led to their slow but sure defeat. However, the war was still not over, for standing in the way of the Imperial Guard was the fortress city of Karnan, which even peasants had been able to defend for a long time. However, the ranks of the fortress defenders were not composed of ploughmen or woodcutters, but of soldiers, both those who had survived multiple battles and retreated to the city, and warriors of the Karnan garrison who had not been engaged in combat. Massive walls and batteries of defensive guns were ready to stop anyone who dared attack the city. But the Imperium would not be the Imperium if it could not put a group of arrogant rebels in their place, no matter their resources. Numerous regiments of the Imperial Guard were slowly tightening the noose around the fortress, preparing to attack. The fields and hills surrounding the fortress began to be covered with a web of trenches and redoubts that each day drew closer to Karnan, despite the fortress's return fire. However, not all guardsmen were engaged in trench work. Many members of the armoured regiment sat idle and watched their comrades labouring in the distance. One such idle unit was Alexander's crew of a Leman Russ from the 85th Armoured Company's Storm Guard. The guardsmen settled in the shadow of their tank named Storm Lance, lazily observed the soldiers with shovels wandering in the distance, sipping from their mugs of recaf. Another squad of infantry in grey greatcoats, characteristic helmets and gas masks marched past the tankers as the tank commander, Captain Alan Stone, watched them thoughtfully. Once the soldiers had moved a considerable distance away, the tank's gunner cast a sidelong glance at the guardsmen and said, "They look strange." "Who?" "Ah, the soldiers of the Death Korps," replied the captain, pouring himself more recaf. "Well, we also seem strange to some regiments, and our planet suffered too, albeit not from a civil war." "Was there a civil war on Krieg?" "Yes. Once I chatted with a commissar assigned to the Death Korps, and when he got quite drunk he told me a lot of interesting things. Little was known about the planet before the uprising. However, rumour has it that Krieg was once a prosperous hive world, a powerful industrial and commercial centre with billions of inhabitants. Nevertheless, the planet is now covered in the ruins of destroyed cities that rise above drifting clouds of poisonous gases. Like many worlds, Krieg fell due to its ruling body, the so-called Council of Autocrats, an oligarchic assembly of idle nobility who grew more paranoid and decadent with each passing year. In their fear of being overthrown from the outside, the dictators fortified their power by any means, creating private armies and surrounding their domains with rings of fortifications. Worse still, the planet's rulers began to resent the influence of the administratum on their planet, as well as the enormous tithes, in their opinion, levied by the Departamento Munitorum. Unfortunately, none of the citizens of Krieg had any inkling of the impending war and the destruction that would soon befall their world. In the year 433 of the 40th millennium, the supreme autocrat, the leader of the largest hive of Krieg and the de facto planetary governor, issued a decree of planetary martial law and declared independence from the Imperium. He subsequently renounced the Emperor of Mankind, not only as his ruler but also as his divine protector, thus plunging the world into chaos. On Krieg, clashes immediately erupted between heretical rebels and private armies on one side, and loyalists on the other. After a massive offensive by the traitors on all fronts, most of the planet fell under the control of the heretics, except for the hive of Ferrograd, which was commanded by the infamous Colonel Jurten of the 83rd Krieg Regiment of the Imperial Guard. As soon as the first shots were fired, Jurten swiftly took control of the hive, eliminating the vacillating rulers of Ferrograd. The city became a refuge for surviving loyalists, but the situation remained extremely dire. The rebel forces numbered in the millions, and the hive's supply lines were in deplorable condition. Very soon Ferrograd was cut off from the rest of Krieg and besieged by large heretical forces. All planetary defense systems fell under the control of the autocrats' forces, and reclaiming the planet would require a full-scale invasion. Jurten immediately informed the Segmentum Command of the situation, but received an unequivocal response stating that the Imperial Navy at the scale required to retake the planet would not be arriving. The colonel was ordered to engage the enemy and, using all available means, reclaim the planet and punish the rebels. Weighing all the pros and cons, Jurten assessed his forces and concluded that Krieg would either belong to the Imperium or to no one. Together with his ally, Archmagos Greel, Jurten descended into the underground vault of Hive Ferrograd to unlock an ancient Adeptus Mechanicus arsenal and retrieve the forbidden weapons buried there. On the day of the Emperor's Ascension holiday, Jurten launched a counterattack he had long planned. With the help of nuclear missiles, the colonel decided to conduct a great purge and erase the heretics from the face of the planet. As the traitors looked in horror at their augurs, hundreds of ballistic missiles soared into the planet's atmosphere to explode within the clouds and release tons of deadly isotopes, which immediately covered the entire world with lethal fallout. For several days, Krieg was engulfed in torrents of nuclear fire, which obliterated the planet's already fragile ecosystem. Jurten's attack resulted in billions of deaths, and the following nuclear winter claimed as many more lives. For the current citizens of Krieg, that counterattack is known as cleansing rather than something that destroyed their world. The planet turned into a scorched wasteland, but the civil war continued and the cleansing equalized the chances. Those who survived the nuclear purge were forced to live in underground bunkers or in subways contaminated with chemical and radioactive waste. For distant terror, Krieg became a world no longer worth saving, just an entry in the books of the Administratum. The planet transformed into a man-made death world, caught in the icy grip of nuclear winter, where a bloody war raged on. Every inch of Krieg's dead surface was scarred by thousands of trenches, wrapped in rusted barbed wire and covered with crater holes from shells. What exactly transpired on Krieg over 500 years of daily warfare is unknown to anyone. One way or another, Jurten perished, and his followers lived on, becoming as fearless and heartless as their leader. For Krieg's citizens, war became commonplace and the only thing in life that held meaning. After some time, the soldiers loyal to the Imperium, who marched like silent servitors through the contaminated zones in their heavy coats and masks, became known as the Death Korps. Over 15 generations, the Loyalists slowly reclaimed their planet, trench by trench, tunnel by tunnel. With bayonets and brutality, and sometimes nuclear fire, they managed to wrest their world from the traitors' bloody grip. After hundreds of years of nightmarish war that can only be imagined, after tens of thousands of bloody battles, and after paying the price in human lives and suffering, Krieg became inseparable from the Death Korps. The conflict on the planet forged a unique military culture and traditions. So with the return of the world to the light of the God Emperor in the year 949, all newly formed regiments began to be named the Death Korps of Krieg. However, the return of the planet was not marked by any celebration or prolonged prayers. The Departamento Munitorum simply noted it and immediately sent ships for the tithe. When the Munitorum adepts arrived on Krieg, they were surprised, for the planet's government offered them not one regiment of recruits, but 20 regiments, well-equipped, battle-hardened veterans, ready for immediate deployment to war zones. Moreover, each newly formed regiment's colonel demanded that his regiment be sent to the most dangerous of all available war zones. As it turned out, during all the time the war had been raging, the planet's inhabitants founded enormous underground cities, digging hundreds of kilometers of tunnels and constructing both living quarters and production complexes within. Understanding that the Imperium needed such soldiers, the Munitorum adepts quickly integrated them into the structure of the Imperial Guard, reorganizing and equipping them with commissars before sending them off to a new war. Despite the concerns of some regiments, which were reinforced with soldiers from Krieg, the latter proved their superiority, especially on worlds afflicted by radiation, much like their own. The Imperium was pleased with the efficiency of the Death Korps regiments, and thus assigned control over the planet directly to the Departamento Munitorum, which in turn immediately imposed the highest level of tithe upon it. While other planets supplied the Munitorum with ore or grain, Krieg supplied the Munitorum solely with soldiers, and it is rumoured that by direct order of the High Lords of Terror, nothing was to hinder this. This decree led to an unusual level of tolerance within the Imperium for certain practices flourishing on the planet, such as the policy of eugenics, aimed at eliminating mutations caused by Krieg's radioactive biosphere, as well as the universal conscription, which remained in place even after the end of the Civil War. Krieg is one of the few worlds in the Imperium that supplies the Imperial Guard with a vast number of soldiers, which is extraordinary for such a devastated planet. That commissar told me that Krieg's scientists received permission to use a forbidden technology called the Vitae womb, which is scarcely used outside the planet. This enigmatic and scarcely understood technology allows the gene techs to produce humans as rapidly and in the same volume as laser guns on an assembly line. No one knows whether they engage in cloning, use growth acceleration technologies, or grow people from scratch in vats. But what is known for certain is that the Death Korps is never in shortage of recruits. Despite Krieg's history, recruitment into the Imperial Guard is almost identical to recruitment on any other world. However, the harsh training methods, battle doctrines, and organization of the Death Korps significantly set them apart from other Imperial Guard formations. Every inhabitant of Krieg is rigorously trained and educated from nearly birth to become a candidate for the Death Korps. The mortality rate among recruits in this regiment is extremely high, as the brutal training mirrors real combat conditions, leaving the candidates no choice but to adapt or die. The minds and characters of future guardsmen are deliberately broken and reshaped, just as their bodies are conditioned to endure all manner of hardships and to bear the heaviest deprivations. Their sanity is prepared to confront the innumerable horrors of the galaxy. The fear of failing the Imperium, their comrades, and the devotion to duty and honor to the Emperor are instilled in the recruits continually, as the command wants to be sure they will not flee the battlefield, no matter the foe they face. It is unknown whether they were so grim from birth or became so through training, but one of the most distinctive traits of the soldiers of the Death Korps is their extreme fatalism. They are reserved, impassive, and very silent, sometimes not uttering a word until the battle begins. The training conditions do not contribute to optimism either, as they train among the old, radiation-soaked battlefields where training regiments march, dig trenches, mine and demine fields, and conduct practice battles with each other. Only those who can endure endless psychological and physical stress are honoured with being admitted to the new regiment of the Death Korps. The regimental doctrine reflects Krieg's history and the grim nature of its inhabitants. During the Civil War, society could not afford to support its weakest members, so they were sacrificed in the name of the Emperor without hesitation. Over time, this evolved into a kind of cult, which persists to this day, permeating every aspect of the Death Korps' combat doctrine. Raised solely for battle and knowing nothing but constant war and drill, generations of guardsmen desired only a glorious death in the name of the Emperor as a reward for their service. This outlook on life has not disappeared in modern times, as the guardsmen of Krieg are always ready to sacrifice themselves to the God Emperor, a willingness that the officers of the Death Korps are always prepared to exploit. For Krieg's commanders, all battles are won in one way, by the ruthless utilization of manpower. One of the lines of the combat doctrine states that any battle where a soldier's combat readiness and willingness to die exceed those of the enemy is already won, as everything else is merely a matter of time and numbers. War of attrition is in the blood of the Death Korps soldiers. They never retreat and do not fear death, as they consider their demise in battle a collective atonement for their ancestors' betrayal. Therefore, the regiments of Krieg are considered far more reliable than most other regiments of the Imperial Guard. They will hold their positions at any cost during the defense, and during an attack, they will never retreat. They might only take cover, waiting for Allied artillery fire to clear the way for them. The Death Korps soldiers are experts in siege warfare and have proven themselves in trench combat as specialists in fighting on contaminated territories. Krieg regiments are organized according to the standard command structure of the Astra Militarum as established by the Departamento Munitorum, with some peculiarities. Unlike many regiments of the Imperial Guard, which often have commissars from their home planets, the commissar in the Death Korps is the only person in the regiment not born on Krieg. However, due to the high discipline and extremely low rate of violations, the commissar often plays the role of a tactical advisor, restraining overly zealous Death Korps officers. In essence, the presence of a commissar is the only restraining factor for officers ready to immediately lay down their heads in battle. The commissar often highlights the insignificance of minor skirmishes that can result in unnecessary losses of personnel and equipment, and which could lead to the loss of much larger engagements. In theatres of war, where the Death Korps has to fight side by side with other units, commissars serve as the link between the Krieg's officers and other high-ranking officials, and they also quell any display of hostility or animosity between soldiers. To avoid such difficulties, far more diplomatically minded and friendly commissars are sent to the regiments and Death Korps than those typically deployed by the officer preceptors to other regiments. Many of them may continue their service in the future with other less civilized regiments, such as those recruited from the feral worlds, or those formed on the worlds of the ecclesiarchy, whose citizens can sometimes be overly fanatical. Additionally, commissars serving in the Death Korps often have a calming effect on Allied troops, being literally the only friendly face among the gas mask-clad soldiers of Krieg. Another task of the commissars in the regiment is to guard the regimental standard, the most valuable artifact each regiment of the Death Korps possesses. Sometimes the regimental standard, along with the commissar, is carried by a junior officer of the Death Korps, an ensign. Being promoted to ensign is a great honour, as there is a high chance of occupying a high position in the future, and this rank generally does not entail a long tenure as a standard bearer. After a while, the officer will be sent to the front line to command a platoon together with a lieutenant, or be assigned to a squadron of Death Riders. However, while the ensign is at the side of the commissar, no matter what sector of the front they are sent to, their presence and the presence of the standard will inspire the men and women of the regiment in which they serve. Krieg, despite its endless military potential, has no aristocracy or hereditary officer class as found on Mordian. Instead, the officers of the Death Korps climb the career ladder, starting as rank-and-file soldiers. Having gone through dozens of campaigns, future officers have proven themselves to be capable commanders or have simply survived the devastating battles. However, this only applies to combat officers. Staff and auxiliary officers are usually attached to the Death Korps from other regiments or imperial nobility. These positions are often retained within a specific family and passed down to descendants. It is also not uncommon for a senior officer of the Death Korps to be placed in charge of another regiment, or receive command over several regiments of the Imperial Guard. Being veterans of attrition warfare, Krieg officers pay little attention to personnel losses, which often leads to issues with morale or discipline, which in most cases will be rectified through corporal punishment or executions. Another noteworthy trait of the Death Korps is that officers never award or receive medals and decorations, considering them meaningless trinkets. The ordinary Krieg guardsmen hold the same view. For them, courage and valor on the battlefield are commonplace, and thus the guardsmen neither expect nor accept any honors or awards for their service to the Emperor. Distinct from the officers and other specialized units of the Death Korps, such as grenadiers, engineers and Death Riders, stand the quartermasters, who are simultaneously field medics, quartermasters and preachers. Like many regimental traditions, the presence of the quartermaster in the regiment dates back to the Civil War. With limited resources at their disposal, particularly medical supplies, the Loyalists were forced to resort to field triage of the wounded. Soldiers with severe injuries, as well as those wounded in no man's land, were officially considered dead if they could not return to their positions independently. Thus, The task of the first quartermasters was to assess the severity of a soldier's wound and determine the necessity of medical assistance. Those who were gravely injured immediately received the Emperor's mercy, an honourable field execution, while the rest were given at least some treatment. This tradition continues in modern times, explaining why all quartermasters, unlike other medical personnel, are always armed. However, both then and now, even after death, a soldier can still be useful to his regiment by carrying various equipment that might be needed by his comrades. Everything useful from weapons and ammunition to coats and socks will be taken from the dead guardsman and sent to the stores. Due to this approach, many soldiers from other regiments compare quartermasters to scavengers, but they pay no heed to this. In addition to redistributing equipment and providing medical assistance, the quartermaster's duties include logistics and record-keeping, as well as tactical observation, during which they mark all enemy positions and firing points before passing this information to the responsible officer. Furthermore, they embody the cult of sacrifice and often perform rites over the sick and mortally wounded soldiers. Among the Krieg guardsmen, it is commonly believed that the death mask of the quartermaster should be the last thing a dying soldier sees. Since there are no specialized companies as such among Krieg regiments, every regiment, be it armored or infantry, may include the specialized units of grenadiers, engineers, or death riders. Grenadiers are the equivalent of stormtroopers and are selected from the ranks of ordinary infantrymen, usually by a commissar or a watchmaster, who in the Death Korps serves as the equivalent of a sergeant. Additionally, grenadiers are recruited from the surviving members of obliterated Death Korps regiments. Becoming a grenadier does not mean receiving a promotion. Every recruit retains the same rank, but within the regiment it is customary to consider that they occupy a higher level in the command hierarchy than ordinary infantrymen. After serving in the grenadier detachment, guardsmen can be promoted to watchmasters and return back to the infantry. However, this happens infrequently, as the casualty rate among grenadiers is significantly higher than in other detachments. Although service in the heavy infantry may be considered a privilege, according to regulations, it is mandatory for everyone. A guardsman assigned to a grenadier squad has no right to refuse this honour and accepts the skull mask as a symbol of his fate. Statistics show that 8 out of 10 grenadiers perish, which their symbol reflects. For the soldiers of the Death Korps, guardsmen in skull masks are those soldiers who have lived too long and now must either prove their exceptionalism and become officers, or finally find redemption in death for the sins of their people. On the battlefield, grenadiers are primarily used as heavy breakthrough infantry with the main task of destroying key fire positions before the main army's attack. Additionally, unlike stormtroopers, grenadiers never use grav chutes, instead heading into battle on foot or in small Centaur armoured carriers. Engineers of the Death Korps, even compared to other Krieg units, are experts in underground trench warfare. Being a cross between stormtroopers and technical specialists, the engineers of the Death Korps have proven themselves in numerous battles. As experienced sappers and miners, engineers can quickly dig deep tunnels behind enemy lines to undermine enemy fire positions or ensure the covert movement of sabotage groups. Helping them in this is a large arsenal of a wide variety of equipment, from geothermal and geodetic auspexes to breaching torpedoes and melter charges. They also have access to drilling rigs capable of tunneling kilometers in a short time. Engineers are among the few in the regiment who have the right and training to use chemical weapons, and they have access to them. They are armed with gas grenades, which they use during assaults, enveloping entrenched enemies in clouds of poisonous gas. However, the most unique unit in the Death Korps is perhaps the Death Riders. Like the quartermasters, their origins trace back to the same civil war. As the devastating war raged on Krieg, it became increasingly difficult for the Loyalists to use machinery. Spare parts and fuel supplies quickly became scarce, as did the people who knew how to operate and repair the machinery. By that time, moving across the surface of Krieg had already become difficult even for tracked vehicles, as the majority of the planet's surface was littered with debris and crisscrossed with trenches. Due to these difficulties with machinery, the loyal command of Krieg had no choice but to resort to the creation of mounted units to provide their forces with an advantage over the infantry opponent. However, ordinary horses would not last long in Krieg's poisoned atmosphere, so genotechnicians performed a series of modifications to produce a new breed, entirely unlike its ancestor. The resulting genetically enhanced animal was larger, stronger and more enduring than an ordinary horse and decidedly more aggressive. The aggression of the beasts is controlled by special chemical injectors that the riders activate as needed. The animals, like their riders, are equipped with respiratory systems and armor to increase their survivability. The cavalry units performed excellently on the battlefield, and even when Krieg returned under the gaze of the Emperor and received various technologies, fuel and ammunition for them, they did not abandon the Death Riders, who are still an important part of the Death Korps. As harsh and fatalistic as their fellow infantrymen, Death Riders are perhaps even more willing to sacrifice their lives for the Imperium. Like the riders of the Attilan regiments, the Death Riders are used for reconnaissance and rapid attacks. But unlike the Attilans, the riders from Krieg do not employ guerrilla tactics and lightning strikes. Instead, they charge into the enemy ranks like the heavy cavalry of ancient terror, crushing everything in their path. Riders also often kill the opponents, who are driven from their positions, and flee as soon as they see the approaching infantry of the Death Korps. Death Riders never retreat and will fight until they either achieve victory or fall. Only the most resolute or highly respected officer can cause them to halt their charge. As for the equipment of the soldiers of the Death Korps of Krieg, they are quite well equipped. All guardsmen, except for the engineers, wear a standard uniform consisting of a heavy coat impregnated with neutralizing compounds called kettles, trousers and boots. Engineers in turn prefer short jackets over coats, as they are more convenient for working in tunnels. Each guardsman also wears a standard Mark 9 helmet made of plasteel, fitted to be more comfortable for wearing a gas mask. The gas mask is a distinctive feature of this regiment. Because of it, the Death Korps soldiers are sometimes mistaken for guardsmen of the Steel Legion. The final piece of equipment is shoulder plates made of plasteel. Moreover, each soldier is equipped with a respirator block with a regulator, a backpack, multiple pouches containing various gear and antidotes, as well as a small folding shovel for trench digging. Grenadiers and engineers, unlike common guardsmen, are clad in carapace armor and modified Mark 9 helmets. Death Riders are dressed in the same uniform as all other Death Korps guardsmen, but with a number of distinctive features. In addition to shoulder plates, Death Riders wear heavy breastplates made of plasteel with chromed overlays. However, these breastplates are more of a tribute to tradition than a means of protection. And thus, many Death Riders remove them when going on reconnaissance or patrol, preferring to compensate for the weight of the breastplate with other useful cargo. The tall boots issued to the riders are far more comfortable than the standard infantry boots. These boots have also become popular among the officer corps of the Death Korps, some of whom formerly served as Death Riders. The officer's uniform is practically indistinguishable from the regiment's standard uniform, but is made of far superior materials and bears some embellishments. Like the Death Riders, Death Korps officers sometimes wear polished breastplates, depending on their rank. In terms of protection, these breastplates offer little benefit and primarily serve to emphasize the wearer's status. For protection, the senior officer corps is provided with special gorgets, which are actually conversion field generators. Officers also wear Mark 9 helmets, which can be adorned with the aquila or the imperialis skull. The Death Korps guardsmen are armed with Lucius Pattern 98 laser guns and 45 centimeter bayonets. Additionally, the standard infantry armament kit includes one fragmentation grenade. In contrast, grenadiers are armed with the heavy lasgun Type 19, which is a variant of the Hellgun produced in the Forge world of Lucius, while engineers of the Death Korps are armed with Lucius Pattern Mk22 shotguns. These shotguns feature a revolving cylinder magazine holding 8 rounds and various types of ammunition, ranging from buckshot or slugs to flares. Besides their primary weapons, grenadiers and engineers carry an array of explosives, as well as bayonets. Death Korps Death Riders are armed with explosive-tipped lances, heavy sabres, and las pistols. The officers of Krieg, however, carry weapons that are more ceremonial or symbolic than practical. They rarely engage in combat, yet have fought in numerous battles throughout their lives, and thus their armament often reflects their circumstances or past experiences. Many officers who once led squadrons of Death Riders still carry sabres, while others prefer to keep a lasgun or shotgun close at hand. The only weapon that all officers carry is a las pistol. But it is likely that if it comes to defending their lives, the officer will arm themselves with something more familiar to them. The captain took a sip of recaf, which had cooled during his recount, and grimacing poured the remainder onto the ground. Sighing sadly, he tucked the mug behind his tunic and, with a conspiratorial wink to his subordinates, headed towards the command Mahari, hoping to procure something stronger from the colonel of their company.